Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to our conversation today about backhaul, fronthaul, xhaul, all we need to get capacity in the RAN. And today I'm talking to Dr. Femi Adeyemi. He's a solution architect at Fujitsu Network Communications. Femi, glad to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Same here. Let's get started give the audience an introduction about what is that you do at Fujitsu in terms of fronthaul, backhaul, and increasingly the xhaul.
Fujitsu has been very prominent with respect to backhaul in the days of distributed RAN. When you talk about how do you take how do you take data from a distributed base station back to your central office. We've been in that business for the last 10 years with major carriers. As we transition from distributed RAN into centralized RAN, we were one of the first companies to identify the aspects of fronthaul. From your remote radio head, how do you get your data back to the central location and then still have the traditional backhaul. So over the last 2-3 years, we've been very, very active in the aspect of CRAN with respect to fronthaul. And at this point, we've been very, very successful. We're deploying now with a major carrier in the US. We're in very active situation with another carrier of very recent. And so now we're shifting our focus to 5G because the dynamics of what you see in 5G with respect to backhaul, with respect to fronthaul, will be magnified. So it's traditional. We've been successful with backhaul, focused now on fronthaul with solutions into the market. And now we're moving towards 5G and what that means.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's start with stage one. So the first was like the move from backhaul to fronthaul.
Yeah.
What were the challenges? What did it take, and what is that you did at Fujitsu to address that first?
So fronthaul has a number of issues. Depending on your topology, your network topology, there were limitations with respect to distance, for example, from how far your remote radio heads can be away from your central office. There were limitations with respect to jitter, latencies. So it was a whole lot of designing circuits, whether that's wireless circuits or WDM, DWDM or CWDM-based optical circuits that will be fast enough to be able to meet the latencies that CPRI fronthaul challenges were. We were able to overcome that. We were one of the few companies that were able to do that both wireline and wireless. And so now a lot of those solutions are being rolled into the market. So we're able to move away from our traditional backhaul where latency is not an issue for many of the operators to being time critical so that we don't lose the users. We've been very successful in dealing with that.
Right. So basically, from backhaul to fronthaul, your requirements increased quite a lot in terms of capacity and latency. Now, as we move to 5G, is it just going to be more of the same? Like, so even more capacity, even lower latency, or is there something else as well?
Oh, the 5G presents different challenges now. Mm-hmm. The users are going to be exposed to on the order of magnitude of 10 times or 1,000 times of what the data throughput supports in the regular 4G. In addition to that, because of the amount of data that will be coming from the access going back into the core, fronthaul now presents actually a bigger challenge in the sense that if you think about it, when we were doing LTE, 2x2 MIMO, 150 megabits per second, the fronthaul traffic was on the order of 2.4, 2.5 gig. And then we max with 4x4 around CPRI 7, about 10 gigabps. With 5G, now we're talking about 64 by 64 or even 256 by 256 MIMO. And the data rates and the bandwidth that we'll be looking at is very large. So that presents different challenge. The traditional CPRI will not be sufficient. The amount of data that we're expecting, even with compression, is now on the order of 400 or 500 gigabits per second. That requires a new thinking, a new method of doing fronthaul. And we are exploring different splits in your stack between the remote radio and BBU to lower that data rate. We are looking at different technologies, whether that's RF, completely RF, or even digitizing the radio signals. But for us, one of the key things that we've worked on in the beginning, and many of the operators that were very interested in this and very interested in the solution that we're able to provide, is that they were not interested in having a 4G based fronthaul that you then have to take out, completely rip it out, and then put in a 5G fronthaul. Many of these operators were very interested in a transport agnostic fronthaul that you can build today and leverage when 5G rolls in. In that respect, our solution is very unique. We've been able to prove that a DWDM-based system or a CWDM-based system fronthaul that is in play today, the ones that we're currently deploying, there for the long haul. It's not necessary that you have to rip it out and then put in a new system. So that has been one of our strong points, one of our strong suits in our solution. It's also it's a smart system that can figure out if you have issues in the network, where are those issues coming from? This has been very, very successful for us.
Right. So you basically you start developing and use a more powerful fronthaul as you go up to 5G. So it's a gradual process that you are following.
It's a gradual process in terms of the technology that you layer onto that transport network. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So today you're doing CPRI. Our calculations now say CPRI has its own limitation. Mm-hmm. When you get CPRI 10 is only 25 gig. I mentioned earlier that we're calculating that you'll be on the order of 400 to 500 gigabits per second. That's right. Unimagined. So your CPRI transport network will not work.
Right.
What we have been able to do is to have a transport agnostic network that you use CPRI today, but if 2 years from now, the transport methodology of choice becomes Ethernet, mm-hmm. Our transport solution is ready for that. So you don't need to remove our transport solution. It's agnostic to the medium or protocol that you're running in that network. That has been very, very interesting to the operators, because what that means is the CapEx that you put in today stays there. There will be some tweaks, by the way, but those tweaks are not major. There may be plugins that you need to put in. You may need to use a different SFPs or QSFPs, but the essence of your network stays the same. That is very interesting to operators because it says you're growing your network as you need it, but you're not ripping things out. Mm-hmm. Your essential transport topology stays the same.
So do you see a transition away from CPRI and so even beyond compressed CPRI and towards Ethernet? Is that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, CPRI maxes out, as I said before, at 25. I mean, today, the standards is only CPRI 10, which is 25 gig. The minimum required for a fully deployed 5G system is on the order of hundreds of gigs. So we see that CPRI is going to go away. I mean, some of our competitors do not like that, but it's an inevitable. Mm-hmm. And we see the transition into time-sensitive Ethernet and or regular Ethernet as you move closer to the central office with respect to your stack split.
Mm-hmm.
It's also something that is very, very now prominent in the industry. We're very active with NGFI in defining and working with other vendors in terms of what that split stack is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best stack for Fronthaul? What is the best stack for 5G? It depends on your deployment model. So,
Mm-hmm.
but to answer your question in the affirmative, we see CPRI becoming something that would not be able to handle a whole lot of traffic for 5G.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of functional splits, there are multiple opportunities there to do the split. Do you see any functional split that is emerging as the winning one?
There is no winning split, and the reason is that what is your network trying to achieve? If you are interested, if your core, if the core advantage for that split is to maximize how close you are to the central office,
mm-hmm.
then you choose the stack split of interest.
Mm-hmm.
If the interest is to reduce latencies, to reduce jitter, you choose the stack of preference. If you want to reduce the frontal traffic, you choose the stack of preference. I mean, one of the ideas that we are actually pushing in the industry is to actually dynamically change that split depending on your network deployment. So we're working with the industry to figure out. For today, there are about maybe 4 to 5 stack splits that are defined. And each of these splits, you have performance-based numbers that are coming out, depending on the data throughput the reduction that you have in your Fronthaul, the jitter that you have, as well as the latency that you can accommodate. So there are different use cases, and for those use cases, 1 or 2 or 3 of those stack splits will be sufficient. Mm-hmm. Now, the other challenge that a lot of companies in the industry are not actually paying attention to, and the ones that we have actually spent a lot of time on in the last year or so, is that we see a deployment model where we're going to have a mixture of CPRI-based Fronthaul, as well as the next generation Fronthaul technology that are coming. We have been working in the background to ensure that that mixture, we can encapsulate your CPRI into the new format that will be defined, whether that's Ethernet or just RF, and still be able to use remote radio heads that you have in your network today, while you are adding new remote radio heads that are maybe doing your 5G technology. So it's what you have in the network today, transition to what you want to do for 5G, and being ready for 5G.
Right. And so, yeah, that's interesting. Now, when we talk about Fronthaul, a lot of people think Fronthaul is equal to fiber, but there is also wireless opportunities. Yes. Are you looking into those as well?
Yes. To answer your question in the affirmative, yes. So you're right. When we talk about Fronthaul, a number of operators just assume it's fiber, dark fiber, and if fiber is not available, then this is not possible. And rightly so. One of the reasons for that is that they don't believe that you have wireless solutions that can meet the latency requirements of Fronthaul. Fujitsu, I mean, we've had a number of products in the market that it's low power, it's low latency, it's very, very compact, so that it actually functions very, very well in cases where fiber is not available for your Fronthaul, and or when you need that system to be a backhaul solution as well. So to the industry, then there is no limitation with respect to your Fronthaul. If you have fiber available, we have solutions to cover that today, whether that's CWDM or DWDM based. for whatever topology you want to address, spoke, point-to-point, ring. It doesn't matter what the topology is. And then you also have wireless solutions that will meet the same latency requirements of CPRI with respect to distance, jitter, as well as ensuring that your data integrity is not diminished.
So where do you go wireless and where do you go wireline or fiber for Fronthaul? I mean, there is no single answer, but how do you see that the trend between the two going?
For example, in metropolitan area, a good example would be, let's take Manhattan, for example. Mm-hmm. There are companies that they already have fiber deployments within that metropolitan. But now, if you need to introduce 5G, and you don't want to go and dig up New York City, right? One of the best methods to do that is to be able to use wireless links. Those wireless links then will be a way for you to avoid digging trenches, as well as avoid new tunnels. You can just hang your wireless links up and still have the same throughput, even more throughput than what you currently have today. The other things that we're also seeing is that in cases where fiber is being leased, you lease fiber for a lot longer number of years, 20 years in some cases, 10 in some cases, even when they're available. Your return on investment with a wireless Fronthaul is very, very high. You install a wireless link today, it is there for the next 10 years for you to use. You don't need to lease it. So in terms of cost, in terms of return on investment, we're finding that wireless Fronthaul is also very, very attractive.
Yeah, so there is some cost advantage to that, but also if you have a small cell, especially small cell deployments, you can also do self backhaul, and yes. Basically, so how important and how valuable is that? So
if you look at the deployment, and I want to make a distinction between what we now typically call small cell, and when we start talking about small cell in terms of 5G. In terms of 5G, small cells now means deploying denser, for the lack of better word, denser or micro base stations. Because for 5G, the spectrum that we're going to be using, they're very, very high. And so the distance that are covered are very, very short. So we need dense deployment. With the dense deployment, then you need to be able to back the data that you have from your small cell back to your central office. The data that is coming out of your remote radio head back to your central location. So the aspect of wireless Fronthaul becomes key. Fiber may not be available. So the concept of self-backhaul, where you use one of the channels of your existing wireless link to backhaul your data back to your central location, is also very, very attractive. So as we were saying, it's very cost effective. You are not locked into any fiber lease for an extended number of years, and you can reuse your own spectrum, and good for the industry. If it's on license, even better. So wireless Fronthaul backhaul is in play.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I guess that you have relatively short distance with small cells, so line of sight is not much of an issue. It's easier to secure than.
Line of sight is not an issue, but we are also we're playing around with both point-to-point and point-to-multi-point wireless links today. Mm-hmm. And they're already available in the market, not as extensive as we want them, but with the advent of mass deployment, large metropolitan deployment with 5G, mm-hmm. point-to-multi-point, non-line of sight, backhaul, Fronthaul, even XO will be very attractive.
Right, and this is the whole millimeter wave area here that, yes. We've been using that kind of spectrum for a long time, but now with the millimeter wave within 5G is becoming a very hot topic of conversation. So what is it you're doing in that space?
The industry will know this because Fujitsu has been in the play with millimeter wave and microwave for a number of years. One of our selling products today is actually in the 70, 80 gig millimeter wave spectrum. And so for us, it's a natural progression as the industry is now shifting to 28 gig, 38 gig, 28 gigahertz, 39 gigahertz, or 60 gigahertz. We understand that space. So for Fujitsu, this is our sweet spot. We are now really actively repurposing many of the technologies that we've deployed in the 70, 80 gigahertz to the new, well, for the lack of a better word, new industry defined 28 or 39 gig. While others are having challenges in the spectrum because they're short in terms of range, we understand that space very well. And we've been in that space for a number of years.
Yeah, so that's important to sort of move through, because there is an interesting, with 5G, the millimeter wave is used both for access and for backhaul, and both for fixed and mobile. So it's sort of a widening of the scope of the use cases, right?
Yes. So to quote a prominent network operator in the US, we were actually being told, you guys have been in this space for a long time. Mm-hmm. Your remote radio head now just needs to go from 700 into the 28 gigahertz or 39 gigahertz space. Fujitsu understand that space very well. And so we believe we are very well positioned for access as part of 5G, mm-hmm. whether that's the lower millimeter wave range or high millimeter wave range. Mm-hmm. Many of these systems now been on trial with operators across the globe. And I'm looking forward to sharing that space with a number of our operators in North America.
Mm-hmm. Okay, to close, let me ask you a question in terms of, is it backhaul, is it fronthaul? What is the relative size of the two markets? How fast are we moving towards a fronthaul type of environment where the RAN is centralized or virtualized?
So to answer your question properly, our strategy has always been, we saw the market moving away from distributed RAN a number of years ago. And one of the things that we define for ourselves is that we see centralized RAN being the foundation for 5G. And so even today, if you look at the 5G architecture, it's a centralization architecture that migrates into a virtual RAN environment. Now, many of the operators across the globe, whether that's in Asia or now in US, they're actually either actively deploying centralized RAN or really thinking about deploying it. And we began to work with many of these operators to migrate their architecture towards the virtual environment. Now, that creates some interesting dynamics. One is, depending on the split that you have between your base station, BBU, and remote radio head, you may end up with either fronthaul completely, mm-hmm. Fronthaul and backhaul, or a mixture of both, where we're now actually defining something called X-haul, which is you have a fronthaul, you have a mid-haul, and you have a backhaul. But that's a function of where you split the stack so that you maximize, whether you want to maximize latency, you want to minimize jitter, or you want to do a better aggregation. So without doubt, we believe that the age of distributed RAN is on its way down. Centralized RAN architecture is now on the horizon. And as we move towards 5G, we see more of the virtual RAN becoming very, very prominent. Now, that's also very interesting. As you densify your access, you can now bring content to that edge. And so the aspect of mobile edge computing, which now houses virtual functions of the RAN, becomes key. We're seeing that across the globe.
Yeah, and I guess that as soon as you move some functionality on the RAN, also the requirements for fronthaul and backhaul change as well.
That is true. That is true. The requirements for fronthaul and backhaul changes.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of data that you need to support in the backhaul increases. The amount of data that you need to support in the fronthaul is drastically increased. And so now you have to compress or play with the stack split, mm-hmm. so that you have the essence of that split to be functional for you. Mm-hmm. But for Fujitsu, our strong suit is that the transport network that we built for you today, in terms of a fronthaul, is capable of supporting your protocol CPRI today. If we move to radio over Ethernet, it will be capable of supporting that. If we move to time-sensitive Ethernet, we're ready for you. And even if we want to just transport pure RF, that transport network that we built for our operators today will be leveraged as we go forward into 5G. So it's good news all around, mm-hmm. from 4G transitioning to 5G.
Yeah. Sounds very interesting. Well, Femi, thank you so much for talking with us. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure, Monica. Have a good evening.
So this conversation with Femi at Fujitsu is part of a report on the backhaul, fronthaul, axial by Sense of Healy and in collaboration with RCR Wireless News. Thank you all for listening in.